In this episode, I chat with Matt Neary. Matt is very well known in the bubble education space, and most people would know him from either running the Air Dev Bootcamp or from running his course Think It, Build It. I personally took the Think It, Build It course when I was first getting into bubble, and it massively shaped my foundational knowledge of bubble. So this was an awesome chat to do. In our chat, Matt goes into the story of how he first came across bubble, what he thinks about the future of bubble, what he thinks the future of no code and code will look like, and a whole bunch of other exciting things. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to the recording. Well, I always like to start the podcast off, right back at the beginning. Where did the journey start for you? So I'd love to, ask you first up, you're in this area of no code and bubble that many of the listeners are familiar with now. But how did you find yourself in this space? Like, how did you stumble across bubble and across this no code space?
So I guess it was 2016, I was studying at university. For the second time around, I sort of had, like, straight out of high school, I went and studied a communications degree, and then I sort of did some traveling and worked in, like, broadcast media for a few years, and then sort of decided I wanted a career change. So I went back to university, and I ended up getting, like, completely obsessed with blockchain technology at the time, like, just completely obsessed with it. And I decided, oh, I need to drop out of uni, and sort of, like, follow that, like, cliched, like, dropout success story path and just try to do something with this technology. I went back to uni to kind of get into, like, public policy, and I was big into environmental policy, and wanted to sort of make a career change and do something, I guess, in the public good. And blockchain kind of captured my imagination from that side of it. And anyway, the long story short is I wrote a proposal for a business idea powered by blockchain, not having any idea technically how to implement it, just conceptually. And it was a peer-to-peer education marketplace. And I wasn't any good at knowing how to make a business out of it, but I was pretty decent at writing that grant proposal. So we won some funding from the European Commission as part of, like, a social innovation competition that they were running. I teamed up with a friend of mine from the university, and that basically paid for us for our salaries for a year to 18 months, while we, like, figured out how do we go from this, like, stupid pie in the sky conceptual thing to, like, a tangible business that solves a problem for people. We were learning all those lessons along the way, and it was right at that moment we got the funding that I was looking, like, okay, how do we build this thing? Like, obviously got to build some software. Like, do we need, like, a technical co-founder, all this sort of stuff, which is a very cliched entry point into no code as well. It's like, people were like, oh, I need a technical co-founder, and then lo and behold, they stumble across this thing called Bubble, where kind of one of the they might have used it in their marketing, I'm not sure, but one of the sort of value props is, like, you don't need a technical co-founder. You can be your own technical co-founder. So that sort of meant that, yeah, I just, as soon as I saw it in a blog post, started playing around and realized, holy crap, this thing is, like, awesome. And then with the funding that we got, we just basically spent a year prototyping all kinds of stupid applications, pivoting left, right, and center, lean startup, iteration, blah, blah, blah. Pretty clueless, to be honest. But built a lot of random apps in the process. So it was kind of my crash course in Bubble, which is the no code, the no code tool that I specialize in.
So how did you learn bubble back then? Because I imagine that was maybe 2016 or 2017. I mean, obviously you're known quite well in the bubble education space now, but back then I imagine there probably wasn't as many resources out there. So how did you learn? Was it just testing or?
Um, well, initially, because we were building a marketplace app, there was a course by a guy called Brent Summers, or it might be Brett Summers. I might be getting it wrong. He had released a bunch of courses that ended up getting acquired by Zero Code, and one of them was like a build an Airbnb marketplace with Bubble. And so I was like, this is perfect. Like, if I just follow this, then I'll be able to build it. And to be honest, I think I probably watched about 30%, the first sort of section of videos, and like once I started getting comfortable with the like how it worked, then it was just like picking and choosing the bits from the course that I wanted, and then asking on the forum. And so it was a mixture of like that course kind of got me started, like initially, just to that level of like, okay, like I understand the lay of the land, like data, dynamic data and conditions, and putting stuff on the screen, and then it was just and then it basically just trial and error, and asking on the forum, silly questions, like being non-technical. Like it's almost it's crazy how little I knew back then about web development and everything really in regards to building software. So it was really just like asking really naive questions, and some stuff I didn't learn till much later, to be honest. Like in that crash course, like that year got me to a point where okay, I could mess around. But when we started running out of money, and then I looked to freelancing, and that's when I actually started to properly learn, like, how to build apps that aren't just little toy apps that, probably leaking data left, right, and center, and aren't performing at all. So I had done a YouTube video on my first like crash course video on Bubble, and based off of that, somebody who was running an agency reached out, and I started working for her just like on a freelance basis, and then eventually that transitioned to more work, and then I just sort of learned from there, really, working on client apps.
That's very cool. That's cool actually how you mentioned that it was from that YouTube video, because I was looking back through some of your older videos just before the podcast. I'd seen some of the newer ones, but yeah, I saw that tutorial one, and it has like 170 or 180,000 views on YouTube now. And it was around 5 years ago. So it's pretty cool to see that the journey from that to now having the course and all of that as well. So it's cool, really cool to hear that story. But did you always have like an entrepreneurial spirit, like from when you were young? Did you always know that? Or was that something you kind of discovered when you're at uni?
Um, I I don't know if I would ever characterize myself as like having an entrepreneurial spirit, like from the get go. I wasn't like launching businesses at school and that kind of thing, but I was always doing creative projects. So growing up, I would make films, just like short films, mucking around with some mates in the backyard or in the bush, in the forest, like shooting silly films. And that's what I went when I went to study initially out of high school, communications degree, which was sort of like you could specialize in film and television, which I did, but sort of doing just a film and TV degree felt like a little bit, I don't know, reckless. So wrapping it inside of a bachelor's that was communication studies felt like a safer option. So that's what I did. And while there as well, I was always doing like side things, or like writing scripts, or like doing little promo videos. And then I always tend to have like some sort of side project, create some creative side project going. So that's been the constant. But like thinking about it in terms of like how do I make money, like that's never been a motivating factor for me, which makes it hard to earn a living sometimes from the creative projects.
Yeah, that's very cool that you've kind of got that creative spirit and that kind of innovative. Yeah, just always creating. I always admire that. I'm not a super creative person, and I kind of wish I had that ability to be more creative and think up ideas. So it's something I really admire in people. But yeah, how did you come up with the idea to do the course?
Yeah. Well, so firstly, I say don't write yourself off as not being creative, because you're doing this podcast, which is a creative thing. So
Okay,
don't be
I
too hard on yourself.
appreciate it.
uh, the course came out of I mean, really, ever since that first like YouTube video, I felt like there's an opportunity to like do something on the education side, because for whatever reason, the way I delivered it, the content delivered resonated with people. So I knew, oh, there's probably something there if I wanted to pursue it. And I was working at a large bubble agency called AirDev, and they had a cohort based training program that they were running to get new developers into the company to work on client projects because the supply of developers was much less than it is now. So they were running their own program to train people in Bubble, and I learned about that program, and I just stuck my hand up and just said, because I was working as a contractor, just as a developer and a product manager for them, and I stuck my hand up and said, hey, like I've got this like sort of educational background, because of the startup, and like I've done this stuff on YouTube. So if you guys need a hand with anything, like just shout. I'd be interested in pitching in if I can. And that basically evolved into a conversation of like, oh well, we think from their side, we're thinking about scaling this training program that we're running, and we want to make an online course. Like, would you be interested in doing it? And so I said yes, and that so I basically built an online course for them, which was tailored towards training people and to become developers, and working in the AirDev system. They've, as you may know, they've got their Canvas framework. So there's things like extra sort of complexity that go along with that, but it's much more relevant to actually working in the job market. And I continue working with them in a learning and development capacity after that boot camp. But honestly, like I just sort of felt like, there was an opportunity to do something bigger. And I just sort of had the itch, to be honest. I had the itch to like, if I just did it all my way, like where I own it 100%, have full creative control, and I've got a bit of a marketing channel already on YouTube. Like if I put more, because even now, to be honest, like I'm not putting enough time into marketing and content and that sort of thing. But I was doing even less back then. I thought if I just put some time in, like could I actually create something like meaningful, something that like can bring in a bit of income, and I own it 100%, and that was exciting. So that's why I decided to do it. Um, just more for the reason of if I don't do it, I'll probably regret it.
You'll probably regret it.
Well, if I don't do it, then I'll probably regret it. If I don't build the course, then you'll always have that question of like, what if I just gave it a go? Like, so that's quite a motivating factor.
I think that's really cool how you mentioned you saw this opportunity and you pulled the trigger. Like you weren't ever afraid of staying safe, and you wanted to like not have regret. I thought that was a really cool idea. I think I think this is just like a thought I've had when I've been younger. I thought when I left high school, I was like, oh, if I choose something at university, then I'm going to be doing that one thing for the rest of my life. Like if I choose accounting, I'm going to be doing that till I'm 70, and that's quite a scary idea. But I think what's really cool about your journey is, you've gone from film and television to kind of launching a startup, getting funding, to working at AirDev, and then launching your own course, and then launching Basis. And it's been a very, I guess, like whirlwind journey of going into all these amazing different areas. But yeah, were you ever afraid of kind of, sticking with one thing for the rest of your life, or have you kind of always been happy to kind of embrace the adventure?
No, I've been terrified of being stuck in something a boring job.
Okay.
That's why I was that's why I went to study film and TV initially, because I was like, this is actually fun. I can't imagine like actually having to like clock in and clock out and just do something that just bores me day in day out. And that's still a major motivator for me now. But and it was so that's basically the reason is like I just get bored, and like something new and shiny would appear, and it'd be like that's the next thing. And I think I was quite proud of that in my 20s. I'm 30, almost 32 now, and through my 20s, I was quite proud of it. It would almost be the same time every year, like February, March. There'd be like this transition, and I'd be like, I was almost like quite happy living in that cadence. Um, but it's different now because now I have a family, so I have to be a lot more careful with making rapid changes, and doing the course was in hindsight. I don't know if I could have ever done it differently, but it was a difficult time to do it because I had a child on the way and we were moving from New Zealand to the UK. And that all happened while I was still trying to build out the course. So the process of actually getting the course over the finish line was incredibly stressful period. So I definitely wouldn't say that the lack of fear in that scenario was a. I mean, who knows if it's a good thing ultimately, right? But what was true was that in the short term it was difficult. In the long term, it's great to have that course out there, but I'd probably be a bit more tactical about making that sort of decision again, knowing what I know now.
Really? So you think knowing what you know now, you would do things differently, or
Well, I probably wouldn't be so brazen as to think like, okay, got 12 weeks till the due date. I reckon I could smash out a course before then and then live off the passive income as my paternity leave. Forget about the lovely paternity leave that Ed is prepared to give me. I've got this. I've got this.
that's
Um,
awesome.
that was probably naive. I mean, it was naive. But if you're not in that position, like if you're in your 20s and you're just figuring stuff out, like yeah, I think people put a lot of emphasis on stability and building their career and making sure they pass this paper or they get these grades when they graduate from university, or doing this job because it builds the CV. And from my experience, like that stuff doesn't matter nearly as much when you're in your 20s. Like it's more about like figuring out what you like doing and what you're good at. And if you're just ticking away in a job that you don't really like because you're scared to leave, like you're actually doing yourself. I mean, it's just a very generalized statement, of course, but I think in a lot of cases you're doing yourself an injustice because if you took the plunge, then you'd actually probably grow a lot more and be a more valuable employee or partner in whatever you're doing later on. But
Really? So
yeah.
kind of taking that plunge is a very growth inducing activity. Is that what you found? Like putting yourself out there in these uncomfortable situations.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like it's always, I mean, like new stuff is genuinely uncomfortable, but different people have different temperaments, right? Like I was like, for me, I'd be getting too bored doing what I was doing and just like felt like kind of I have to do it. And then yeah, I think like I said before, I think like there was a certain amount of pride in that identity for a period of time too, like going against sort of the status quo and just doing what I felt like doing was sort of like thrilling and invigorating and gave me that the idea of that gave me energy. That's not the case now that I have a family. Now my priorities are different, but definitely for a period of time in my 20s, that was the case.
That's awesome. I found it a very helpful course. I would definitely recommend it to anyone getting into the world of no code or Bubble. It's been very helpful. Yeah, did you find Bubble a very, like, I guess, empowering software, like when you came across it? Because you mentioned like you didn't have a technical background.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably to a detrimental degree because, like, especially in the beginning, that classic graph of like your perceived competency, and you think that you're really great, but you're about to enter the valley of despair when you realize that the depth of what you don't know. Um, in the beginning, because every idea that we had, we just thought, oh, we can build it. It was basically like, oh, we could build anything. I mean, not anything, but in that initial stage, you definitely feel like, oh my gosh, yeah, this like whole new capability that I now have that I didn't have before. And I think more like Bubble is like it's like a steroid for getting people to that degree of technical competency that gives them that feeling of empowerment. But anyone who who takes a longer traditional path of learn how to code and maybe working with like traditional code frameworks they're gonna get to that point too, right? There's a certain point where like you just feel like, this is, and I'm sure like people in lots of industries have that, like maker trades, whether you're like a carpenter or a builder. Like I'm sure there's a sense of like, oh, within this domain I can do it, like I can build stuff. And I'm sure everyone feels empowered, and I'm sure that the majority of people feel like I actually like building, whether it's building houses or building benches or building apps. But it's the building for other people on a tight deadline that I don't like. Building is actually enjoyable itself. So yeah, but bubble in terms of like not needing much capital or prior training, because all you really need is a computer, access to the internet, and a modicum of intelligence. You can create something that other people can enjoy and that you can show off and that has its own like internal intelligence. And that's before you get to that point. If you're non-technical, like what other mediums do you really have for that? Like writing maybe, but that's very like one directional sort of way of expressing yourself. But this is actually something that is clearly has like value and people can use it. So yeah, absolutely, it feels empowering to know bubble.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty incredible tool. It's very very revolutionary. But yeah, that kind of leads into the next question I'd love to ask you is you've also built Basis. Is it I think you've co-founded it, right? And
Well, I've sort of joined Josh halfway along the way. Josh has done basically all the work on Basis. But we teamed up last year just to see if there was a way to like combine the efforts that we were doing in our different domains. And he's a designer by trade, and I'm obviously a no code developer by trade. So I co-founder. Yeah, I mean, like at this point we're mainly working on client projects. Josh is the driver behind like the basis framework. Definitely, I just sort of help out here and there.
okay. Yeah, it's a very cool framework. I feel like there's a little bit of trend in no code going on where there's a lot of these frameworks popping up like Basis, because I mean obviously Bubble is very quick and you can build things very quickly, but being able to use pre-built components like in the Basis framework where you can drag on an app shell or drag on a top bar nav or a pop-up, and it's very quick to build things. But I saw you guys came out with, because I think originally when I downloaded it, it was just the Chrome extension, but recently you guys came out with the template as well in the Bubble marketplace. Is that kind of where you're seeing the future of that going, or?
Well, the starting with a template is just the most expedient way to give people a foundation. Isn't quite the right word, but an environment that all your styles and style variables can be anchored onto. Like, because just pulling off random components, and then every time you pull them in, then you have to like map them to some pre-existing style, is a headache, and not the way that you should be working. Like, it's a terribly inefficient way of working. So we like talk through a lot of different ways that we could like help people work within the constraints of a design system, essentially. So in Bubble, that's obviously like styles and style variables. And definitely the easiest path is like if you start from the template, then just technically speaking behind the scenes, like you pull in a component from Basis, and if it has the same style references that you have within your existing application, well then it's just gonna immediately, as soon as you import it into the app, it's gonna have the relevant style attached to it, which just makes obviously maintaining everything much easier. So that was the main reason behind that. But other than that, like we sort of, one of the driving like principles is like to keep things as modular as possible. Like we didn't want to have like a really big template with a lot of bloat and a lot of stuff that people didn't need. So it's like very minimal. And then everything, the idea is that everything that you need, then you'd pull in from the template, from the extension as you need it.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool that the template was kind of very minimal, because I think some of the templates I've tried to learn in the past on Bubble, it's almost like you need to take a whole course to learn the template of the framework. But I thought that was very cool about Basis. It was a very kind of minimal. But yeah, I'd love to ask you, where do you think the future of no code and Bubble is going? Do you think it's only going to get a lot bigger and kind of pick up even more momentum, or do you think things will die out and AI will take over? Or yeah, what is it? Where do you see things going?
Well, I think I don't know when it will happen. It's more like, I guess, what I want to happen than what seems to be happening is more of a dialogue, so to speak, between code and no code in the tools themselves. Like the tools that I want to see are the ones that I can build stuff in my no code interface, and then I just basically like lift up the bonnet if I want, and then I can go in and modify the code. So like there's some back end tools that do that, but yeah, nothing that I've seen that can really do it effectively on the front end. But with AI, I mean, there's obviously the ability to like to write a prompt for a piece of logic or an interface is coming. I think Bubble, they already have like a beta of the like page builder. So it should become extremely easy in the next 12 months to generate designs with AI. But I think the challenge is finding a way, like you still need some best practices as to like how those designs actually form like a cohesive app experience. Well, both a cohesive app both for the end user and the developer. Like I think it's a very hard problem because people haven't done it. Like how do you generate components? How do you generate, like if you want to generate like a dashboard page, obviously the first instantiation of this AI tool is just like page, boom, what all the elements are there. But like what you really want is like a whole bunch of reusables nested inside each other, right? So like modularity, and it's closely related to like the dry principle that you're talking about, and just general programming principles are I want to see more tools like embrace or make it easy to build in like a maintainable modular way. And I think Bubble does an okay job at like letting first timers just like come in, and like you said, you just build it and you build the same, you repeat yourself 7 times over, but like that's okay in the beginning. Like that's just the way it is. Like that's just part of the learning process. Like you need to do that before you feel like, ah, there must be a better way, and that leads you naturally into learning about how to make things more like modular and maintainable. So I think the space will, I guess there's a long-winded way of saying like this. I think the space will embrace more of like development best practices in the way that in the tools that it makes available, like Bubble especially, and that like a greater, maybe not Bubble, but some of the other tools are definitely going in a direction where like you can use the no code interface where that makes sense, and then you can lift the lid and modify the code where that makes sense. And that's, in a lot of cases, it's much easier to work with code because now we have AI, so I can describe the logic that I want, have that be represented in the code, and then it's not, I don't think it's as big a lift as people think it is to actually learn how that code is working and modify it. Where it gets complex is like if you have to maintain a whole code base with different files and modularity, and it has to be hosted somewhere in different frameworks. Like that's like a whole Pandora's box. But like the beauty, I think what's really nice about no code is it gives like something like Bubble is like an all-in-one hosted solution. So I have there my architecture, and I can create all the modules that I want and kind of see the relationships between them in a visual way, which is what I want. But then within those modules, what I really hope to see, and what it seems to be happening is then I can sort of make it X-ray mode basically, right, and
Yeah.
turn those little no code sort of visuals into code and manipulate them, and then all you have to do at the end of the day is just like configure what are the inputs and configure what are the outputs so that other nodes can connect to them. You might have heard about a tool called Noodle.
I haven't. What's Noodle?
They're a full stack no code tool that were showing a lot of promise, and I mean they still arguably are, but they've gone open source, which makes it harder for just like regular people like you and me to go and use them right now, because you want something that you can kind of spin up quickly and in the no code space traditionally. But what they had was a really innovative interface for design applications where every every piece of logic and every component, every UI component, every logic computation component was represented as a node and you could string them together and configure the different outputs, and you end up with this node graph interface that some in the gaming industry you have like Unreal Engine and what's the other one? Anyway, doesn't matter. But they both have a no code interface for building games, and it works in this node graph interface where you define like this node does this is how it works internally, and it has these outputs and these inputs, and then you string other nodes to them. And that I think is like it's a bit of a conceptual shift for people to get their head around it at first, but I think like once you get familiar with it, it's a much more intuitive way of managing a complex application. Because in something like Bubble, it's very intuitive to get started, because it's just like, oh yeah, this is basically how my brain works, right? I want to click that button, then I want to go here, and I want to do this, and like, okay, that makes sense. But once the apps start getting complex, you need to start working with like established programming best principles. And in Bubble, those the levers that it has available for you to do that are kind of hidden. Like they're not front and center, and it's not super. The developer experience isn't it's not super smooth for building apps in that kind of way. It's fine once like when you know Bubble, it's fine. But I think there's better ways to do it ultimately. So that's kind of a long-winded sort of answer.
Yeah, I think you're right. Better kind of almost communication between that code and no code. That's definitely going to be exciting to see how that plays out in Bubble and in other no code tools. I think that's going to be very exciting to see. But I'd love to ask you one more question before we kind of pivot into the last segment. So you've had like this awesome journey from doing film and TV to a startup to air dev, freelance work, doing educational work. Think it, build a course. You've done so many different things. You're now 32. What advice would you tell someone who's 20 years old, or what advice would you go back and tell your 20-year-old self?
I think it would be more. I don't think my career advice would have been that different, I'm very glad that I took the path that I did of trying out lots of different things, and I think it would be more just like mentality based, which is like don't get hung up too much on the successes of particular projects that you're doing or work that you're doing, as if like it matters in the grand scheme of things. Like, because I think there were quite a few times where I would get sort of quite down about like certain projects that were like hard to get over the finish line and that sort of thing. And I think I'd probably go easier on myself and just prioritize like taking on real responsibility as much as possible. That's probably what I would say. Take on real responsibility as much as possible, rather than like skimming around the edges and just like playing around, like making stuff for yourself. I think it's like when you actually have a responsibility to deliver to other people that you grow the most. Whether that's in a job, it could just be like a job, or in your studies, or or a client, like it doesn't matter. But I think those are opportunities where you can grow the most, because you kind of have to find a way to deliver. When you don't have that pressure, then for me personally, I've sort of, I don't know, just sort of like diffused. My motivation has diffused, and it's like, who am I doing this for? Like what's sort of like the purpose for this? Which I think it just comes down to like basic needs for human connection. To be honest,
Basic human needs for connection. What do you mean by that?
so if you are just like riding, for me personally, and I see this with some of my I've seen this with friends of mine as well over the years, is like you can get really obsessed about wanting your career to go in a certain direction, and thinking like you need to do it because that's what you're passionate about and that's what you love doing. And so you spend an insane amount of time and effort working on projects and building your skill set and this sort of thing, because you're obsessed with this kind of identity, or think you're obsessed with creating this sort of like way of life. And I would say that that's probably being driven from the wrong places. It's probably being driven by some internal insecurities that won't easily be resolved, and certainly won't be resolved by continuing to go down any particular path. But I think like when I have found myself more in situations where I have to deliver for a client, for example, or deliver in a job, the feelings of like pressure, that the pressure that you put on self to like, oh, I've really got to learn this skill, or I've really got to like release this video, or what have you, seem kind of ridiculous. Like it's like a ridiculous torture that you put yourself through to like release this thing because of what some ideal of the career or the life that you thought you wanted to have. I think I just tell people just to chill out. Like there's some people who like are just, they're just gonna do whatever it takes to like be successful in their domain, and that advice doesn't apply to them. But like to the rest of us mortals, probably comparing yourself to those people isn't the way, and we should just like chill out.
That's great advice. So for us mortals, just chill out. I love
Yeah,
that. I'm gonna clip that
chill
up and
out.
put it in a short. That's perfect. Motto for life. Yeah, I think that's really awesome advice. I think a lot of people in their kind of early 20s will really be able to resonate with that. So that's really awesome. Really appreciate you sharing that. Um, but I thought I'd kick off into the final segment. It's just called the rapid fire finishes, and it's 5 rapid fire fun questions to finish off with a bit of fun. So the first one is, what is your favorite book?
I really love Anna Karenina, which I've only read once, but I don't usually like a lot of fiction. I usually read non-fiction, which I also struggle to get through. But Anna Karenina, loved the characters, loved the way that was written.
Oh wow, okay, bit of Tolstoy, very intellectual.
I still know.
What is your favorite movie?
I think it's still got to be Pulp Fiction, even though it's probably been 8 years since I've seen it. But in my before that, I think I'd probably watched it 10 times. Yeah.
Well, okay, that's good to hear. You have a background in film and TV, so it's cool to hear what you like there. If you could have dinner with any 3 people, they can be dead or alive from any time period, who would you love to have dinner with?
Ooh, is part of this question the fact that you can see them interact with one another?
You can see them interact with each other. Doesn't just have to be you asking them questions. You can just watch them eat and watch interact.
I think I'd have to have Elon Musk at that table. I would just have to. Um, uh, um, for a multitude of reasons, including his successes and industriousness and all that, but also like, you know, what I would want to do is also have like the Buddha there, or Dalai Lama or someone like that, just to like contrast, and um, yeah, put a different take on it. And then, oh, like the next person who comes to mind, just because they just take over the bloody cognitive space for everybody, don't you? It was Trump for some reason. I think I just want to see what he's like in person, like in just like an intimate setting. Um, I'm not entirely happy with those answers, but there's my quick fire
I
responses.
love it. I'm sure there would be some great conversation at that table. um, if you could go back to any one day in your life to relive that day and re-experience it exactly as it was, where you couldn't change anything, just live it as it was, what day would you go back to?
Um, I'm gonna give a cliche but nonetheless true answer. My wedding day was just a fantastic day. We had a small intimate wedding with just our immediate family and some really close friends in a big house that we rented in Spain, and it was just a magical day.
That's awesome. I love that answer. And then the final question is, if you could know the absolute truth to any one thing, what would you know? What would you love to know the truth to?
Would I love to know the truth too? Um,
I've thrown you quite in the deep end there. It's a bit of a curveball. So
big, big question. I think because you don't want to know things that you don't want to know ultimately, right?
oh,
Because then that's just a burden as well. So I think I'd have to go. I think I would have to play it safe and go for something more like philosophical, which might have to be is the level of consciousness that we understand, is that it's just a human phenomena, or does it impute everything else in the universe? Like, what is it? How does it work, basically?
that's awesome. I love that answer. That would be very cool to know the truth to. I really like that.
Probably unknowable, but who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, well, thanks so much for coming on, Matt. I know we went a little bit over time, so I really appreciate you, giving up your time to share some wisdom and some lessons for people younger in their life. But before you go, is there anywhere that people can go to follow you or follow any of your products? Should people follow you on YouTube or Twitter or LinkedIn? Where's the best place that they can follow you?
Probably if they just go to mattneary.co, then there's links to all of what you've just said. So YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, the course. So they can then do whatever tickles their fancy.
Awesome. I'll put the links to those down in the show notes so everyone can go out and check out mattneary.co. But thanks so much for coming on, Matt. It was an awesome pleasure chatting with you. I'll stop the recording.
Thank you, Josh. That's